were you doing at Edinburgh?
I did an arts journalism fellowship.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if you know Sasha Greenwald.
No.
Yeah, but it was part of like my journalism work.
Got it. Oh, very cool.
So,
there's great people at Edinburgh there.
Yeah. You're at University of Maryland.
Yeah, and I did my degree at UCLA,
Oh, you did?
so I knew.
Oh, so you're out there.
Yeah, I was born and raised in Southern California.
Were you
so
really?
yeah.
I'm from Silver Lake.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Nice. I'm Inland Empire, so about an hour east.
Funny.
Yeah.
Small world. Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yes. I've gone there recently. There's something about transformation. Yeah. Here and there.
Okay. I'm just going to give a quick housekeeping thing. 30 seconds. Yeah, but
Is everything good over there?
Yeah, I mean, it's functional.
Okay.
I'm gonna make it something.
Okay. Should I like start introductions?
But wait.
Wait a minute. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, yeah. So let me know when it's ready.
And sorry guys. You repping everything?
Okay.
Thanks, PJ.
Thank you for your patience. And thank you for coming to Misconnections. We have a really great panel here today, and I will be presiding. My name is Ellen Foster. I am coming from upstate New York, where I am in the STS department at RPI. And really quick housekeeping announcement, don't go on that side of the room, because there's apparently a lot of dust, and it'll kick up, and we don't want dust. While we're down here. Also, I just want to remind you of the hashtag for this panel, which is hashtag C5. If you have anything to contribute or questions, we also have our hashtag moderator, Rachel Hyman, right here. So she'll be helping out on that level. And without further ado, I want to introduce our panelists. So first we have Jason Farman. He's the director of the Design, Cultures, and Creativity program and associate professor of American Studies at the University of Maryland, College Park. He is author of Mobile Interface Theory, Embodied Space, and Cognitive Media, winner of the 2012 Book Award from the Association of Internet Researchers. And he will be presenting first on material realities of mobile internet culture. But I just want to go down the line and continue on. And we also have Xiao, Mina. She is a technologist, writer, and artist living in San Francisco. She builds translation software for social media at Eden Labs and is a co-founded The Civic Beat, an online magazine about technology, creativity, and social change. She was most recently an arts journalism fellow with the University of Southern California and the Goethe Foundation. We also have Tante here, coming from Germany. He lives in the internet and in the German beat space where he works at a small university. He's been writing about the future of us as networked beings and the way technology changes the social world on his website and other publications, including Xiao and Wired in Germany. Apart from thinking about the digital sphere, he likes monkeys. We also have Shawna Finnegan, coming from Winnipeg, Canada. So we have a lot of people coming from all over, which is great. She is among the queer board working with the Association for Progressive Communications, and APC is a network of NGOs based mainly in Latin America, Africa, and Asia, working at the intersection of technology and social justice. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to hand this over to these.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, and one more thing. Hold your applause until the end.
Yes, hold applause.
So,
Until the end of Q&A.
yeah.
Yeah, especially if you're upstairs.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Thanks. It's been a great conference so far. I'm happy to be here. And I want to start with a quick story about my laptop here. And actually this phone as well. So 2 interesting things happened to me last week. I took my phone in to get repaired because the sleep-wake button had stopped working and the battery had stopped working as well. I took it into the Genius Bar at the Apple Store, and the guy said, "You know you're eligible for an upgrade, right?" Obviously, the comment that they would make. A couple of days later, I'm in a meeting at the University of Maryland, and I carried this water bottle with me around campus. The lid was off. You can kind of see where this is going. I make a sweeping gesture, knock my water bottle directly on top of the keyboard of my laptop here, poured out almost the entire bottle of water right onto the laptop. I lift it up and I'm shaking it out of the DVD drive, a waterfall. So it's dead. So when I tell the story to people, the first comment that they make, you can imagine, the first question they ask, did you back up your data? Always, there has been no other question about the laptop. Once they find out it's dead, did you back it up? And I did. But I'm really interested, what would happen, what would the cultural landscape look like if that wasn't the question that was asked right away? I'm curious, what if people started asking, what will you do with your machine, instead of about the data that's on the machine? Or can you repair it? That would be interesting if that was the culture that we lived in, where that was the first question, can you repair it? And if not, can it be recycled? And if it can be recycled, how can you make sure that it's not recycled in ways that are unsustainable, where it's shipped over to developing countries, for example? So using my phone and my laptop as a jumping off point, I'm going to move quickly in 2 directions. Moving forward, where my laptop will go if I'm unable to repair it, where will it go if it gets recycled? And then moving backwards, how did my mobile device and how do our devices end up in our hands in the first place? So part of this is to recuperate a materiality of wireless culture, of a culture that's in the cloud, to really talk about how these devices arrive to us. The first and most renowned aspect is that these devices, your mobile device, is gathered from elements and minerals from all over the globe. Most notably, perhaps in the news, is coltan, which is predominantly mined and historically mined from the Democratic Republic of Congo, which has the most reserves of coltan. And coltan is in all of your mobile phones right now. It's incredibly important for it because it conducts electricity without getting hot. And we have mostly been pulling coltan out of the DRC, and it's mined under just incredibly harsh conditions, often by child laborers, and the funds that we pour into coltan are sponsoring civil war in the DRC. In 2010, it came out that, and this didn't load quite well, that Afghanistan is noted to be perhaps what people are calling the Saudi Arabia of lithium. They were like, oh, 2010, by the way, Afghanistan is just filled with minerals related to digital culture. Lithium, it is perhaps now the world's hotbed of lithium. It's where we're going to go for lithium. So this comic, for example, says, there's a guy digging here. Cut that out, Wilson. You're supposed to be digging a trench, not prospecting. And these elements come from all over the planet. Oh, this isn't loading at all. Let's see. Oh, we'll keep going and see if these. So I have a map actually that I tweeted at Farman. You can perhaps take a look at it. The elements that go into our mobile devices are from all over the planet. Your device is one of the most transnational things that you own. It is the convergence point of all of these people, laborers, elements from around the world. And your device ultimately has been touched by many hands. And this runs against the grain of our cultural imaginaries around what the production process of mobile phones looks like. This is a Verizon commercial for their Droid phone, which encapsulates kind of some of the imaginaries we'd like to have about our mobile devices and how they are produced in this day and age. So our mobile devices are hyper-locally produced in the back of the store by Verizon employees who are skilled enough to press play on the machine that stamps your phone together, for example, and paints it a unique color tailored just for you right in the back of the store. Instead of this, we have this device that has instead been touched by so many people. It has not been stamped by robots. It's been handled by a wide range of people from around the globe. And I think about this in the context of one of the key terms for the University of Maryland where I work is innovation. There are two words that my university uses in every single publication or email it sends out. Innovation is one, entrepreneurship is the other. And innovation has a flip side of the same coin, which is obsolescence. So we live in a culture of innovation, which is a culture of progress, moving forward, and innovation is always within the context of potential obsolescence. It functions because of obsolescence. Innovation makes things obsolete. And so we live in this, in a culture of progress, and as Walter Benjamin argued, the results of progress is a pile of waste. And for us, that is quite literal. We are creating piles of waste through the obsolescence that we have. This came to the fore for me in the Seattle Art Museum. I came across Chris Jordan's work. Chris Jordan is an artist who visualizes big data. And this is a 100 by 60 inch canvas, and you have to walk right up to it, just literally inches away to actually see what it is. And when you're right up against it, you just see that it's visualizing hundreds of thousands of cell phones. And then you pull back and walk away, and Jordan's goal here, Chris Jordan's goal, is to visualize. So I'll let it pull back for a second. And then you walk over to the placard and it says 426,000 cell phones, equal to the number of phones discarded every single day in the US. And he visualized that. You know, for him, infrastructures and waste are things that are dispersed, so how can we gather them and use art as a means to communicate that? So of those phones, only 11% of them make that into the recycling stream. And when they do make it into the recycling stream, even legitimately, they often end up in places like Gaiyu, China, which is the planet's capital of e-waste. And in Gaiyu, they melt down circuit boards to pull out things like the copper from there, and the gold, copper mined from Chile. And in villages in India, for example, as well, they burn batteries to pull the metal out of the batteries. So you can imagine the toxicity of this makes its way into the bloodstreams of the people who live in these places. Gaiyu, for example, here's a river in Gaiyu, and this black sludge in the middle is actually printer ink toner. So we are creating massive amounts of waste literally out of innovation. And in contrast to this is the idea of repair. And this is a picture of the Brooklyn Fixers Collective here in New York City that actually teaches people how to go in and fix your devices. And for me, repair is a really interesting word. It's both a practice and a metaphor. I really like repair as a metaphor to think about those moments of cultural breaking are also those moments of intervention when we can actually see things in a different kind of way from phenomenologist's perspective. Things that are embedded in your everyday life, you often don't notice them. They become so a part of common sense and a part of everyday. It's when they break that you step back and look at things. And then these are, in my opinion, the moments where we can see the structural problems and perhaps make some interventions into them. And repair is a metaphor for that, that we can go in and actually repair. And this vibes with Jane Bennett's book, Vibrant Matter, where she says, a guiding question, how would political responses to public problems change were we to take seriously the vitality of non-human bodies? By vitality, I mean the capacity of things, edibles, commodities, storms, metals, not only to impede or block the will and designs of humans, but also act as quasi-agents or forces with trajectories, propensities, or tendencies of their own. So Jane Bennett tapping into the political nature of this, that we are connected to the materialities of digital culture, and through those connections we can think about what it means to be human, to connect within this world, is not only to connect with each other on our devices. For me, as a scholar of mobile media, we do often study communication practices over these devices, but those communication practices need to move beyond the interface. Our studies need to move beyond the interface to look at the context, the physicality of these interactions, and to understand that human-human connection also needs to be studied alongside our connection to our devices' connection to geological impact that they are making on the planet. And part of this is developing what Lisa Parks calls an infrastructural literacy, that the infrastructures, the flows of our commodities to us, how they work, how they can be repaired, for her often are designed to disappear. And having an infrastructural literacy is a means of intervening in that. So to return to my laptop, how do I respond to this laptop that is dead from the water that I poured on top of it? And for me, it's a larger question about how we address planned obsolescence as well. When I dropped my phone previously, I had just bought the phone and it fell face flat on a parking lot. I called Verizon and I said, so I just bought this phone, it's a month old, can you repair the screen? Is there a way I can get the screen repaired with you? No, you have to buy a new phone. So can we address planned obsolescence both in the hardware and the software, where devices, especially smartphones, become obsolete as software updates? Can we change policy? Can we actually change the design of the phone itself? The design of a phone is not common sense, and we don't have to throw these entire things away. And as an educator, can we educate? Can we inform people about it? Can that make a difference in consumer culture? But beyond that, I think the education that we can advocate for is to reveal the relationship between the common sense and power. That power is often exerted by the things that we take as common sense. Power dominates most powerfully when it's unquestioned, when it's part of common sense. So, in terms of education, I think there's a transformative power in making visible those things which have been made invisible. And I'm an advocate of Sidney Smith's quote, "It is the greatest of all mistakes to do nothing because you can only do a little." And this, to me, is where the interventions can happen. So, to conclude, why is this on a panel on connection? And I think it's important to understand that we carry our mobile devices with us, and so we also touch what others have touched. We are connected to people globally. We also carry the burden of the weight that they signify. We carry the weight of their journey. So for this panel on connection, the phone you have is already deeply connected with a network of circulation that involves people from all over the world and also involves your relationship to the geologic record of how your device will eventually be discarded. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mina. I'm going to pass out pieces of paper. There are just 10 of them, so just spread them around in small groups. It'll make sense in a little bit. So I'm a product designer and I'm a researcher, independent researcher and writer based in San Francisco. And some of the research I'm presenting was supported by Art Center College of Design, Intel Labs, and UNICEF Uganda. And here to talk about some rhetoric around the next, rhetoric of connectivity, the connectivity binary, and the next billion. And I'll start with a map. I'm starting with a few maps, actually. And so what you're seeing on a piece of paper is a map, but this is the map that Vice called the most detailed picture of the internet ever. It was constructed by using a botnet, apparently illegally, that pinged Linux computers and all around the world and created this really impressive looking map. If you look it up online, it's actually an animated GIF, and you can see these flashes and points. And you also see there's a number of dark spots, and it's those dark spots that I'm interested in looking at today. if we were first to look at a few other maps of connectivity, this is a map of visualizing friendships that was put out by Facebook. You'll note again, it's just kind of this, there are a lot of bright spots, but also a number of dark spots, notably in China and Russia, where Facebook, people have limited access to Facebook, and in places, parts of Australia, Africa, and Latin America, and parts of the US as well. And this is one other map. It's a submarine cable map put up by Telegeography about all of the physical infrastructure of the internet and how that enables those bright lights that you're seeing. But the map I want to hone in on today is this piece of paper that I'm passing around, and that piece of paper is just a map of the Bowery. And it's not remarkable, but it's inspired by a piece of paper that I saw a few months ago in San Francisco while walking around. A migrant woman from China came up to me and was asking for directions. And she held a piece of paper of Google Maps, and it was pointing the way. And I had to update. A friend of mine had to check our Google Maps and just confirm the details, and then update her records to indicate where she was going. And a woman like her would not show up on these bright lights. She didn't have a cell phone. She didn't appear to have any kind of internet connection, but she had a Google Map. She was accessing some of the products of the internet in a specific way, but in a way that I think gets more interesting when we look at this in other contexts. So the rhetoric around the next billion is there's a Quartz Next Billion conference. There's a number of people talking about the next billion people to come online. By 2016, global internet traffic is expected to double. And internet traffic as of 2014 looked like this. So it's 2.3 billion people on mobile broadband subscriptions, 7 billion using mobile cellular, 3 billion people using the internet either by mobile or fixed landline. And what's interesting to me about these statistics is that they're focused on telecom. It's a telecom-centric view of the internet and how we access the internet, and it's based on single subscriptions. So there are a number of people who are made invisible by this. And the researcher Jan Chipchase has noted that connectivity is not a binary, the network is never neutral. So what this overlooks, I think a lot of us probably have televisions in our homes that we share with other people, right? So you have one television, but maybe 3 or 4 other people use it. And then we see a similar practice in developing contexts where people will have a single phone that they will use, but then share with their family members and friends. And therefore, those statistics that we just saw earlier, if one person is using it, but 4 other people one person has a connection, 4 other people are using it, those 4 people are invisible to these statistics. And what I want to focus on is another method of sharing and using the products of the internet that is also quite invisible, but I believe is actually quite impactful and represents the broader role of the internet. So I want to hone in on one of these dark spots. This is in East Africa, where I did some of my research in northern Uganda, and it's apparently a dark spot, but show you different ways that people are accessing the web. My research site was up near Gulu in northern Uganda. Gulu town is about 4 or 5 hours drive by dirt road from Kampala, the capital, and it's a place where there's apparently limited connectivity. I'm going to show you pictures that illustrate the region using Instagram, just as a reminder that I had 3G internet access the whole time, but the people I was working with couldn't afford that access, and also didn't have access to running electricity or running water. So here's a picture of Gulu. This is it's an emerging town up in the north, and but further out, it's quite rural, and people will walk dozens of miles to pick up water to bring back to their homes and villages. They live in simple huts or in Western-style buildings. And you'll see these electric wires that are running along the roads. But those electric wires are either not connected to the grid, or they're not providing electricity for the people living right next to them. So effectively, people are not connected to the grid, or apparently don't have access to the internet. But what's interesting was, while I was there doing research on technology usage, I started hearing a song. And I turned around and I said, what's going on here? It was someone listening to the song on their phone. So they had the MP3 of Call Me Maybe, which as of 2012, 2013, when I was doing my research, had been one of the most viral products of the internet, right? It was from YouTube, thanks to Justin Bieber. And here it was being played on a young woman's cell phone. And so I started asking questions. I said, "Oh, how is this happening?" She had a phone. It's actually a hand-me-down from the United States, a Nokia phone. A lot of people would have Chinese-made phones, and granted, it's a minority of people, but they would have kung fu movies from Hong Kong. They had Nigerian comedies. They had African pop music, Western pop music, all in their phones. And it was a very interesting and rich media environment in which people were listening to pop music and entertainment. And so the first question is, how are they powering this? Is solar panels. And so people would walk all the way to Gulu town. It could be a full day's walk to go up and go back down to pick up a solar panel for about $100 to $200 as a major investment, and bring it back. And they would place these panels outside their buildings and place it on the ground so they could rotate it as the sun went around. And this would power businesses. This would allow them to share connections with friends, allow them to create a small business of providing charge for people. And they actually share the files through Bluetooth transfers. And so people will put two phones together, and we literally just got this feature with iOS 8 with sharing photos. But Android phones, if you've had them, you probably know, and low-cost feature phones have been able to transfer files by Bluetooth for many years now. And so if you imagine transferring those files, right, and just doing that over hundreds and hundreds of miles, you effectively have a non-telecom centric view of file sharing, and it's kind of like an internet, and allows for this file sharing. And this kind of culture of mobile sharing and mobile connectivity through solar powers and through social sharing is really very much embedded in parts of the region. And my research is, I go into specifics with northern Uganda, but I'm not the only one observing these patterns of sharing, and it's actually quite a global phenomenon that I think can help us rethink both the connectivity binary and how the internet is having an impact on the world. So I'm going to hone in on a few parts of the world. Cuba, there's Western Mali on the other side of the African continent. There's Philippines, and there's also North Korea. Christopher Kirkley, in 2012, he's a music researcher based in Western Mali, and he started a project called Sahel Sounds, and he would actually collect the music that people were sharing via Bluetooth and put them online. And so effectively, he became a conduit for transferring this Bluetooth network into what I call the telecom-based internet. In places like China and the Philippines, where I've done field research and work, here's a picture I took from the Philippines in rural Luzon. People, even though people might have access to 2G internet, 3G internet, or even home broadband, you do see these practices of cell phone transfer for larger files because it cuts down on costs and basically exists as this kind of parallel site for file transfer. Place like Cuba, there's news coming out about an offline internet where people have been sharing files forever. You might remember the Zunzunio kind of Twitter-based project that a company was trying to do to kind of foment revolution in the country. But what's happening is people are realizing that some parts of Cuba had mesh networks already. They have hard drive to hard drive file transfers of Western and Latin American entertainment media, and so we're already finding different ways of accessing the products of the internet. And of course, as you can think about this can also have political implications. In North Korea, there's been the research for years about how sneaker nets and these forms of file transfer could possibly be breaking the kind of hermetically sealed media environment that the North Korean government is creating. And so there's a great article in Wired recently about how activists are actually smuggling USB sticks across the border, either by actually physically going over or by sending them over through hot air balloon. And then people are watching these through either cell phones or little devices called no-tells that are not formally connected to the internet, and yet they're watching a lot of the great products of the internet, both South Korean and Western media. And the word for this kind of phenomenon is, as looking for like a vocabulary for this, is sneakernet. It's actually quite an old kind of tongue-in-cheek word. Obviously, an alternative to the word internet or ethernet. It's this idea that you're wearing sneakers and you just go and transfer things over. That's literally how I put my presentation onto this computer, was by putting a USB stick and then walking over and dropping it into this computer. And obviously, sneakernet's kind of tongue-in-cheek. Not everyone is wearing sneakers when they're doing this, but the idea is that people are physically transferring files via historically it might have been magnetic tape or floppy disks, but it's also these tiny USB sticks or SD cards or micro SD cards on phones. And I would add, Bluetooth transfer is probably allowing for these sneaker nets to exist. And to a certain extent, I would say pieces of paper, even faxes. I learned recently at RightsCon in Manila that a lot of activists are using fax machines to basically share the products of the internet with people in rural areas in the Philippines. And so I think there are two kind of major takeaways that I think can really advance this research, and as we all know, maps really share the perspective of the map maker and often the interests of the map maker. And I think we need new maps of the web's impact. We're very much focused on connectivity and who's online and who's offline, but I think of connectivity more as a spectrum. And this was a mapping exercise I was doing at my research site, where we were mapping like how these files are transferred between two major towns, Gulu and Lira, and then would reach all these villages and much more rural areas as people were downloading files and then sharing them via the sneaker net. And the larger conceptual frame here, I think, is starting to think of the internet like water. And this is an analogy I use a lot because if we're used to a certain type of internet, I think, here in like urban parts of the West. We're all tweeting, we're online, we're constantly online. It's like a feed. It's like the Google Glass view of the world, that you can just get this fire hose of data all the time. And to a certain extent, that's very true, I think, in this city. You can just turn on water, you know it's going to come, it's going to be clean, it's drinkable, and it's reliable. And you don't really have to question where it comes from or the infrastructure. And as we just talked, is that infrastructure is made invisible to us. Places like Philippines and other developing countries, the internet is more like a shaky thing. You turn on the water, you're not quite sure what's going to come out, and it can be messy, and sometimes it doesn't work at all. And so you've developed alternative ways of accessing this data. Places like China and Turkey, that water might look polluted, and so that data might also look polluted. You're not quite sure if you can trust it. You might use special filters, things like that. And then research sites like my research site in northern Uganda, or in places like Cuba and North Korea, the internet is more like a well that you would go to go fill up and then bring back those products back to where you live. And so this is a picture from Sudan, which is bordering my research site in Uganda, where people will travel by donkey for miles to pick up water. And it got me. This is really where often the way we access the internet parallels the way we access water. It's not, of course, a perfect analogy, but it gets me thinking that the internet is much broader. I think it's much broader. It has a much broader impact than this rhetoric around the next billion and around connecting the unconnected would have us believe. And I think it's much more global than we think right now. But that global access doesn't mean equal access, right? It's a very different type of access. But also unequal access doesn't mean no access. That the products of the internet are finding their ways both downstream, and in certain limited extent, people are able to upload those products as well. And so as we think about the next billion, I think the image I like to share is as we come and find that we're trying to connect the next billion, they might already be listening to Carly Rae Jepsen, watching those kung fu movies, and jamming out to Nigerian comedies already. So thank you very much.
Okay, I'm going to talk about something called dark Twitter now. Just a quick apology in advance. I'm from Germany. My English is not that great, so I apologize for all the horrible things I'm going to do to your language. It's not intentional. I hope it survives it. So we all love Twitter, and Twitter, we have our Twitter handles and our little badges here, at least many of us. And Twitter is, from for many of us even an identity provider, which is a very hot topic at the internet at the moment. You know, who is your digital identity? Facebook wants to be, Google wants to be, your governments try to maybe find ways to be your identity provider, and that is a big thing that Twitter does, but obviously we don't use it for that. We use it to find community, conversation, inspiration about the things we love. We try to find people to stay connected to people we like, we find interesting. That's the sales pitch that Twitter gives us. You know, you can be connected to the world. There was a saying at some point where Facebook are the people you went to school with, Twitter are the people you wish you went to school with. And so that's what Twitter tries to sell you. And that's half truth, but actually that's what Twitter's really about. This is a screenshot from my Twitter dashboard, your ad dashboard, where you can get the analytics. You say, I'm not huge, just one of those people there. It's about growth. Twitter is about growth, about growing your audience, growing your visibility, getting more retweets, getting more fast, being more important, establishing your relevance in the world. It mirrors the kind of economic perspective that the people building the software have. You know, it's all about growth, getting more to please probably your investors. So what is dark Twitter? There are many different things that have been called dark Twitter. What I'm not talking about today is the dark Twitter some people refer to when they talk about networks of accounts with a very dark sense of humor. That's not it. I've also heard dark Twitter, I've also heard people calling a network of goth people dark Twitter, which makes sense, but it's also not what I'm going to talk about here. And there are probably many, many different things that are called dark Twitter. What I'm talking about here is an partially overlapping, highly curated networks of protected Twitter accounts interconnected with other protected accounts. So you have a protected account where you can control whoever sees it and whoever reads it, and you are connected usually in both directions with other accounts that handle that the same way. So in a certain way, it's more like a Facebook relationship, so it's a bidirectional relationship most of the time. It's called dark Twitter because it's dark as the dark web. Google can't see it, and even I, who's part of that network, can't really map it because I'm just connected to a few people I know, but I can't search it because of the way Twitter private accounts and protected accounts are built. I can't see who people follow to discover new people, for example. I need to know that they are there so I can connect to them. And that's why it's called dark. It's obviously sometimes dark things happen there, but that's a different thing. A few remarks on the history of where the dark Twitter that I talk about, which is a very German thing, but probably exists in other places on this planet as well. One of the key things where it emerged was the German Pirate Party, which had some sort of success. Nobody really knows how that happened, but it happened. And the only thing that the Pirate Party members really had in common was that the internet is cool. That is maybe a true standpoint, but for a political party that might not be really enough of a shared value. So there was a lot of friction between the members of that party, and many people, because they used Twitter a lot to communicate, even people with functions in the party used Twitter to communicate to each other. So they created these second accounts. Back then they still called them rage accounts, where they had the freedom to rage and vent about the people they had to work with that they didn't really share any political beliefs with, really, but they were kind of stuck in one party. Another thing where dark Twitter was very relevant was a hashtag called Aufschrei, which is the German word for outcry. It was started by some women to illustrate the everyday sexism in the German society. Just women using that hashtag to describe what happens to them every day, all day. It's 60,000 tweets or something in that area of just people explaining what it is, just to show mostly the males what the hell is going on. And you can imagine what happens. Women who try to gain a voice and to try to criticize sexism in the world, they got the nastiest of comments that you can imagine. So they had this back channel where they could support each other, where they could kind of help each other out emotionally. After all I don't think it's an international word, but in Germany it's called a shitstorm, where, you know, whatever you say, people just throw shit your way. And that was a way for people to alleviate that stress. So that is my dark Twitter account. Obviously, you can't see anything because it's protected, but just it is in certain ways a very good example for many things. First, it's very clearly connected to my identity. You know, the name is Tante. The account name is Other Tante, so it's clearly that it's connected to me. I have my website link there. Everybody knows that that is me who wants to connect to me. The people you follow and your followers is usually a small number, mostly underneath 100, and mostly the numbers are similar. It's not always bidirectional, but usually it is. So that's kind of how many of those accounts look, at least the ones that I can have access to in any way, shape, or form. So, quick disclaimer, the things I'm going to tell you now, there is always some sort of guesswork at hand here. I talk to many people there, even people I don't really follow on that network, but you know, there's only so much you can do, and I can't really map it. We're working on something to do that maybe next year, but it's kind of hard. So there is a certain dark Twitter style that established, that emerged, where at first it was connected to those events like a hashtag, like friction in a party. These days it's just there, and it has certain practices that just happens there. In some way, it's a cultivation of the digital self. You know, you say things there that you don't want to put on your very public persona. Maybe you criticize someone you don't want to criticize in public because you have to work with them. But it's not only about trying to avoid consequences for your own personal life. It's a lot of you criticize someone there because you don't want to do it in public to give the wrong people ammunition. So I see, for example, feminists criticizing themselves in that space, just so not some weird men are using those arguments against the people. So it's a way, like a back channel, a somewhat more trustworthy channel to exchange ideas, and also criticism as well. There's also sometimes very emotional content. People are sad. I mean, we all are, probably all are sad as well sometimes. And that's a place where people just say that. And because you're just connected to people you kind of trust or like, because it's a very curated space, you kind of want to interact with that. You see some person is sad. So this sign emerged. This is something you say when you want to support someone who says they are depressed, they're sad, but you really don't want to force them to interact. You know, it's I'm sad, and then people say, yeah, what's up? Maybe you don't want to talk about that. You just want someone to hug you in a certain way. So this is like a symbol for two arms hugging you. That is a practice that establishes there as a lot, where people just put something that feels very negative for them, and they get strong support, but not support they really have to work with in any way. It's a very interesting phenomenon there. There are arguments as well, obviously, but they tend to be less aggressive, less toxic maybe even, because you don't have these drive-by people who just get into the conversation, because you only can get into the conversation if you already trust each other, if there's already a basis of respect for one another. So that can have a good impact on conversation, but obviously can also lead to some sort of echo chambery reactions. It's not always perfect, but it does certain things well. And you never leave home completely, obviously. There's a lot of meta commentary about the other Twitter. So very important people in your peer group, and they say something stupid, you don't want to criticize them in public because you don't want to get into this kind of a fight there, but you need to get it off your chest. And just yelling at some bird outside doesn't really work, but at the dark birds that can really understand what you're saying, there it has some value to kind of vent in a way. There a certain level of etiquette established that is nowhere written down. That's just what I gathered from talking to people. That seems to be mostly the consensus that people operate by. Obviously, there's always people breaking those rules, and that's accepted because it's not a very formal way. But the biggest rule is you shall not leak. You do not screenshot a tweet of someone and put it out there. If you do that, you're out. You're very quickly out. You shall identify yourself. You have to relate your dark Twitter account to another identity. You don't even have to relate it to your other Twitter account, but people need to know who you are. If they can't precisely identify who you are, you will not be in there. They will not accept you. It's a very protected space for most people. Then there's some things that are more like guidelines. Think before you comment. You try not to reply as much there, because sometimes people just put something out there. It's okay to say whatever you want, but maybe you don't need to comment on everything. So comments there are a lot rarer. It's usually really about very important interaction there in that way. Also, you're not entitled to anyone connecting with you. You might be good friends, but maybe you don't want that person in that space. And people who start complaining, why don't you follow me? Why can't I follow you? that's like a big no-no in that community. You don't do that. People have the right to decide who they want to have there and who they do not want to have there. And if you have an open account from the normal Twitter and somebody allows you to follow their dark Twitter, which happens, don't reply to the dark Twitter account. Don't drag the other Twitter into dark Twitter, so to speak. That's also something that is not seen positively. The sanctions are easy, you're cut off. If you break the rules, usually the first time you do that, you get like a slap on the wrist. The second time, that account will block you, and then if that happens another time, probably everybody's gonna block you. It's very strict in that way. People will protect those set of rules. Dark Twitter can be used as a source, interestingly. I said you may not leak, that is true, but sometimes there's just this observation you want to share. You can do that by saying, you write RTP, protected, or whatever, and then you just quote the thing. You don't really identify who it said. The author is just dark Twitter. It's this blob that sometimes spills over to the light, but you cannot really pinpoint who did what. It's kind of like the Chatham House rules for meetings, where you may say what has been said, but you may not identify who said it, and you may not identify other participants of that discussion. So it's oftentimes related to people on the German light Twitter, so to speak, say over there, da drüben, meaning it happens in this weird space that you probably can't access in the way I can access it. When I created my dark Twitter account, my biggest problem was what kind of sharing is expected of me. If it's so private for many people, what am I supposed to do? Do I need to write that I'm sad all the time? Are people expecting that of me? Is it like this currency that I have to bring in to share a lot of me? Which in a certain way happens. If you're too quiet, people will find that weird and find that kind of stalkery in a way. But nobody expects you to write down everything there that you have a lot of leeway, but being too quiet or being too much of a promoting your own stuff there will lead to probably you being cut off. So dark Twitter is basically wrong Twitter. We're doing it wrong because we're not gaining any kind of traction. It's not an identity provider for us in that meaning. We're not. Even if we're smart there, nobody's going to see that except a few people, and they can't even tell people that we're smart because they have no way to link to that. We don't gain anything. It's like we're doing it wrong, but it's cool. Another question that often comes up, is dark Twitter about privacy, which it seems to be, but I disagree. I don't think it really is. I think dark Twitter is a commentary on the idea of consistent personal oneness, because Twitter is your online identity. That's you. I am @Tante. You can refer to me there. But that's also not true, because I'm also Jürgen Goether working at a university. I'm a brother, and I'm a husband, I'm a friend, I'm whatever. I'm many different things, and in all these different contexts, I'm very different. And the internet really doesn't often work that way. We have this one account, and we have to deal with it that it maybe is a professional account in a certain way, so we can't really share too much private information, but we want to. So dark Twitter in a certain way kind of takes a certain aspect of our personality and moves that out of our public persona people refer to. It's actually, it has gotten spin-offs, so to speak. There's naughty Twitter, that is a very sexualized kind of dark Twitter, where you also have protected accounts following each other, and it's mostly about Tinder without all the pictures. It works for some, and I can imagine many different spaces where you can build networks like that are intransparent to the public, but that serve a certain aspect of a personality. So dark Twitter allows people to be all the beautiful and chaotic selves that we really are. I mean, I know people who have like 3 dark Twitter accounts for different aspects of their personality that they share with different people, just so they know, okay, here I can be sad, here I can be very sarcastic, and there's also my public persona where I say, here I wrote this article for X, Y, or Z. So it's in that way, I think it's not really that much about privacy as it is about being able to be all the things that we are. I think it's also it has a lot to do with trust. Establishing trust is always hard, and that is the way, obviously, you trust people that you let into your dark Twitter, but you see if they follow the rules, how respectful they interact with you. So it's a way to have a basic trust that already exists and to kind of support that and to enforce that. Does it really work, or is that person maybe not that trustworthy? in that way, it's really a web of trust in the actual meaning of the word. You have a web of accounts and you see who behaves in a way that you can trust them with information that might be not for the public. So in that way, it's also very interesting. I know people who got in fights on the public Twitter, then for some reason they kind of got into interactions on dark Twitter, and suddenly they really became friends because they saw different aspects of oneself and found a different way to interact with each other without just sharing all their opinions suddenly, but it could establish that kind of trust in a way. So yeah, that was a quick tour through dark Twitter. Thank you. That's me if you have any questions other than those that will come up here later.
All right, let me figure out Mac.
And I will have a question at our time for Q&A after all the presentations.
Right.
But I'll hold your applause until the very, very end.
Okay, so I'll set my timer. So I'll start with a disclaimer, which is that so the name of this talk is Exploring the Impact of Network Shame. And I'm emphasizing the exploring part because the further I got into this research, and I'm not a researcher by profession, it's really a personal interest, the more it really sprawled. So this is very much looking at different aspects, not all aspects, both to do with shame and the internet. And what I found really interesting when I was looking at shame and the theory around shame is that there are actually a lot of different definitions of shame. So I'm not sure, just by a show of hands, has anyone heard of Brene Brown? Yeah, a few people. So she was on a TED Talk that was quite popular around the power of vulnerability, and she did a follow-up talk around shame. So she has this definition of shame that it's understood as the fear of disconnection, and the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. So when I first listened to this TED Talk, watched this TED Talk, this seemed like a good definition to me. That seemed to encompass more or less what I understood of shame. But I don't know that it necessarily does encompass all elements of shame. So has anyone ever had the experience where you're walking down the street and you think you see somebody you know, maybe walking off in the distance, and so you start waving, you're like, hey, you're really excited, and they get closer and you realize, I don't know that person. They're a total stranger. And there's that feeling that I would call shame of you wanted to connect, you thought this was a person you knew, and then it's a stranger. And that doesn't necessarily fit with this definition. It's not that I don't feel that I'm worthy of belonging, it's just I thought I was connecting and I wasn't. So, and there's also a lot of discussion about how shame develops. And so, some theorists suggest that actually shame can be seen in infants as young as 6 months old. And what it looks like basically is this idea of basically you're looking, like they have this image of an infant looking at their mother and this connection, and then the connection is broken in some way. So there's this feedback loop that's happening between mother and child, and it's usually mother and child. And the child is expecting, a smile, a positive response. And for some reason, the mother is distracted or something, so she doesn't give that feedback. And they see what are seen as sort of the sort of key symbols of shame, which are the eyes down, head averted, which is the image that you can see here, which is kind of a symbolic image of shame. So when we look at shame from that perspective, it's actually quite broader, and I think in a way makes it much more interesting because it's pre-verbal. It doesn't necessarily imply a conscious thought about I'm not worthy. It's just you wanted to connect and you didn't. And so this is why I thought it was quite interesting. There hasn't been a lot of research done about shame on the internet, but when you think about the internet as being, completely about connection, and shame being about a moment of disconnection, how does that interact online? So I want to talk just briefly. I know we've talked about technology-related violence and online harassment in different sessions here, but So my organization, the Association for Progressive Communications, we run a campaign called the Take Back the Tech campaign. And recently we released research looking specifically at corporate remedies to technology-related violence against women. And you can see the countries listed here. I think this is interesting in part because we often tend to hear more about violence against women and online violence in North America and Europe. And there are definitely some similarities when you look across different cultures. But it's also, like to get this perspective of what actually are both the intentions of the violence and what are the long-term effects of the violence. So one of the things that I thought was quite interesting that came out of this research was, first of all, it was actually really hard for the researchers to find people willing to talk about their stories of online violence. In part because there is still a lot of shame around those experiences. So even if the violence has stopped, even if, for example, inflammatory comments were taken down, if personal images were taken down, that shame lives with you. And the other part is really that the shame was a big part of the intention of the violence in a lot of cases. So there's this one horrific case of a woman in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and she and her partner were drugged and basically, did people know the corrective rape? So this idea that mostly it's among the lesbian community, and it's actually, I think, originated in South Africa as a term, and it's quite actually really awful at how many queer people in South Africa experience corrective rape or have a huge fear of it, and it's just basically this idea that what you're doing is wrong, and we need to show you that basically, like what you really want a man, basically. So, and in this case, with this woman in the Democratic Republic, she woke up to a text message from one of her rapists saying, "This will teach you," and the images had been shared all over the internet. There was a huge family shame, and it was really like that was the goal, really, was to shame not only her, but her family. Her whole community basically isolated her, and she ended up leaving the country eventually. And that's really, that was common in a lot of the cases, actually, that came up in terms of family shame. So I think that's both difficult in terms of if that's the goal, to shame somebody, but then what is the response? And so for a lot of these women who are experiencing violence, there wasn't a lot of remedies in terms of corporate response, in terms of legal response. And so what they were left with was really the support of their community, if it was there. And sometimes it was organizations that reached out. Sometimes it was finding other women who'd experienced similar violence and being able to share and feel that you weren't alone in that experience. And so another research that APC conducted was called Erotics, which is a nice acronym for exploratory research on information and technology communications. So there was a research that was done in Brazil, and they were looking at a variety of things, but among them they were looking at a community of what was called sort of like boy lovers. And so this idea was basically that there are people in this world who have this strong attraction to young people, and they don't want to act on it, but they have there's such a huge shame and stigma about even having those feelings that you can't talk about it, you can't even to yourself admit that you have those feelings. And so a community developed in a social network in Brazil called Orchid. And really a part of this support of this community was to actually help each other not get to that point of action. And it's a very uncomfortable subject because for a lot of us, we just want to think, well, no, that's wrong, and you have to just suppress that, and therapy, whatever. But the point is that if you have those feelings and you shut them down and you hide them, this is one of the things that's come out in the research about shame, is that shame loves secrecy. shame thrives on secrecy, and it builds and it expands, and it leads to violence, it leads to drug abuse. And so by keeping it closed up in that way, it can often make it a lot worse. And so it's an uncomfortable subject to talk about, but in a way, I mean, I've heard, or rather read experiences of people who, while they've never acted on it, just the ability to talk about it without this huge shame was really important to them. So now I want to talk about vicarious shame. So has anyone ever had the experience of you're watching a movie or a TV show and someone does something just so embarrassing and you can't even watch, you know, maybe you have to pause or fast forward. And there's actually it's actually become popular. I think it's called cringe comedy now, where The Office and other TV shows really sort of like thrive on that awkwardness. But this is Eve Kosofsky-Sedgwick, who's a queer theorist. And what she talks about is really interesting about shame is that it's highly contagious. So without having, you're not, doing this act that's necessarily shameful, but you have this experience of shame that's so visceral. And there's been research done about why are you feeling this vicarious shame? And it's still new research, and there's actually still a lot of debate about this, but there are two things that sort of suggest where this is coming from. And on the one side is this idea that the other person is violating your group identity. So you're maybe, let's say you're a feminist, and some other feminist does something that's just like, in your mind, it's so unfeminist, and you just feel so ashamed because, this person is basically making feminism, not representing what you believe feminism to be. So that's one side of it. But the other side of it, which I think is in a way more interesting, is empathy. Is this idea that you feel a strong sense of empathy with the other person, and that's where your shame comes from. And when I think about that side of it, the empathy side of it, that seems to turn shame in a way a slightly more positive, that you're connecting with that other person when you feel shame. If you didn't feel that shame, perhaps you weren't connecting with that person in a way. And so I think it's very interesting in terms of, so the way that Eve Kosofsky-Sedgwick describes it is this feeling of just being overwhelmed. And it's sort of an isolating feeling, even though you're connecting to that other person, you're also feeling very much isolated in that shame, because shame is very much an isolating emotion. And so we go back to the idea of shame and the question of identity, and this is where I think it starts to get more interesting. So basically this idea that shame is very much connected to identity, but not in the sense of, I'm already at 12 minutes, but not in the sense that it's, it constitutes it in sort of a permanent way, but that it's constantly changing. So your experience of shame is constantly changing your identity. I'm just going to rush a bit. So there's this interesting quote also around distinguishing queer from the normal. And so this idea that shame is supposed to be something that's socially unacceptable. And whether it is actually unacceptable or not, we as a society decide that. But there's this idea that by embracing shame, there might be this element of sort of embracing messiness in a way, and embracing this idea that you don't need to be one thing. And again, it's sort of, this language is a bit difficult sometimes, even for me. I've been reading for a long time. But this idea just basically that by embracing what society says is not okay and being able to sort of push that a bit, what does that do in terms of really challenging social norms that are clearly destructive? And then I just want to finish on this quote by Eve Kosofsky-Sedgwick, which is around transformative shame. And there was a presentation done yesterday by Fuck Theory, and they were talking about sex, and sex being sort of the mantling the threshold also between private and public, introversion, extroversion, and shame very much does that too. It's a very personal, but it's also very much about your connection with other people. You don't experience shame without that interest, without that desire to connect. And so what I want to talk about in terms of a final point is really this idea of how can we use shame to really harness empathy and connection. And so when we have those moments of shame, Tante was talking about, how can you give a virtual hug to somebody when they really need it, when they're really feeling ashamed? Like, how can you really embrace that in terms of a connection when people are feeling disconnected? Because that's really the crux of what a lot of people discuss when they talk about shame, is there's this disconnection, but it's with the need for reconnection. And so does shame make does the connection that's created in the aftermath of shame, is that more powerful? And what can that do when you bring people together? For example, there's been some discussion around the Pride movement and bringing people together around that sort of shame and sort of taking pride in what society has said you should be ashamed of. So I'm going to leave it there, and I apologize that I'm over time. Sorry.
Thanks. So why don't I start the Q&A, and I thought maybe we could first just go through, if there were like a brief, going through the Hashmod, or going through you, as far as like what has been happening on Twitter, or anything interesting coming up.
So there hasn't been a ton of questions. It seems like most of the people, to be honest, have been in the room. But I did find an interesting question, possibly from someone who's also in the room. It was for Tanta. There's a question: is it hard to juggle dual identities with dark/public Twitter? Do you ever accidentally tweet on the wrong account?
And actually, if you guys can go stand over there by the street, when you're done.
So yeah, that actually happens not a lot, but it does happen obviously, because you juggle all these different identities. Especially if you don't use different apps. Most people I know just use different Twitter apps, because you can, for their different accounts, just so they know where they are at any given point. I actually went so far to give the dark Twitter app a different dark skin, so I know, okay, this is dark, this is where you write that. But it still happens, obviously. If it's just a little transgression, it usually doesn't have any effect. You just delete the tweet and nobody really talks about it, and it's fine. But it happens, and it actually happened to politicians I know who posted something that was not supposed to go public to public. But mostly people who use dark Twitter a while kind of have an eye on that. Okay, was that, you always check and check and check it. Not always enough beforehand, but usually afterwards you do. But yeah, it happens.
Okay, so now I'm gonna open up, and you guys have to like walk up here so that the stream can get your question. So even if you want to like start lining up or something, maybe you can like have a line.
Do it over here.
Okay, so stand here.
Right here.
Right here.
Oh yeah, look at that.
So the stream gets you.
So I have a question that was originally for Tanta specifically, but it's sort of for all of you, which is that all of the things you're talking about are about sort of peripheries of technical networks, and thus present methodological problems for knowing things about them, right? So your ability to reach dark Twitter, to reach any of the other sort of spaces that are about not being connected. The problem is, how do you know things about them? For example, how do you know that the norms that you're talking about on dark Twitter, this is the most easy, explicit way to put it, are true of other kinds of protected Twitter networks? How do you know that you're finding, all or the most important of the thing that it is that you're interested in, whether it's sneaker nets, material circulation, or people who are ashamed? That's the question.
Oh, great. Yes, I'll stand here. Stand here. I guess just to answer that briefly, I think kind of the provocation I said that we need to map the sneaker net is kind of this goal that we can't quite reach. It's more that it's more the question that there are ways of accessing the internet that are beyond the realm of big data, and so in many ways I actually acknowledge that it's not possible to actually get all the details. But at the same time, as I've looked at different research in Cuba and North Korea, where I haven't myself done the research, I've seen a lot of patterns, and I think recognizing, some of my work is helping people recognize that this is a global phenomenon, and that as we look at these things, we can start to see patterns, but also recognize that by its very nature, these sneaker nets are difficult to track, and that's part of what makes them beautiful, I think.
Yeah, and I think for my work looking at infrastructures, one of the challenges is trying to know what you don't know, trying to find out what are the questions, what should I be looking at, and I think for me, I've had these moments walking into a internet peering point in Northern Virginia, or walking into a switching station for Verizon, and them explaining how this actually works, and I have that moment of, oh, I didn't know that about the internet, or I didn't know that about mobile networks. And I think for me, the follow-up question to that is, who benefits from me not knowing? So for me, I don't imagine that the knowledge about infrastructures or about sort of the peripheries are fully knowable, and that's fine. And I also think it's worth pushing on visibility while acknowledging that sometimes the role of the researcher can tiptoe into areas where revealing things is sort of an act of power in and of itself, like expressing my own abilities as a scholar to reveal what has been hidden, and I think we have to caution against that. So I think working on the periphery necessitates an acknowledgement of the unknowability of a lot of it, but still pushing towards some modes of visibility, I think.
I think it's a really good question, and I think something that I've really been finding in doing the research that I've done is recently that people don't like talking about shame, and they really don't like talking about when they feel ashamed. And so a big part of it is just saying, I feel ashamed. There was this really good example that Quinn Norton was talking about around sort of there's this violence online where people are saying these horrific things to women, and at the same time, they're not really understanding why are they saying these things. And sometimes it's because the person who's actually saying the harassing or violent comments themselves feels a sense of shame or a sense of being misunderstood, a sense of disconnection. So from my perspective, how do we approach that? It's by talking about shame and admitting when we feel shame. And even if we don't know why, just saying, I feel ashamed.
For dark Twitter, the fact that that there's no discoverability in a certain way is actually, that's the main selling point. In a certain way, it kind of relates to the sneaker net that you outlined earlier. I have been at parties where I talked to someone for an hour, and then I realized that they were in dark Twitter as well, by accident, and then we connected there. It's not something you really put out there. It just happens that people at some point in a relationship to one another that might come up. But it's really, for dark Twitter, where it's different from what you said, with dark Twitter adding discoverability or that kind of thing would actually destroy, I think, many of the practices of that network. And there it connects to the shame idea, I believe. It's in that weird space between where you want things out there, and that's probably why this idea of pushing something out of dark Twitter with just the source dark Twitter is there, because you show that there are people who say something or who believe something or who feel something, but it is a way for you to disconnect from that. And in this specific case, the disconnection is actually a feature, I'd say.
So Oh, the battery might be dead, actually. The battery is dead. Okay, so any other questions? We have time for like one more question. Yeah, come up here and then. Yeah, and just stand. Here, I'll stand.
Okay.
Just by the.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Very half-formed thoughts, but I was struck by maybe a parallel between the sort of non-telecom internet and the dark Twitter in terms of sort of like there's a scarcity in the connectivity and also sort of in the quanta of identity. There's a certain cost of setting up this new identity and things like that. And I'm wondering if again, half-formed thoughts about how that scarcity sort of impacts people's behavior and what they use the scarce resources they have available to them to, choose which files to share or not share or make those sorts of decisions, or, do I have 2 identities? Do I have the sort of personal bandwidth to set up 3 and 4 to really represent myself fully within the world? And
Oh, it's just project, okay.
Yeah.
So in terms of I guess to answer the question on scarcity, I think scarcity really drives a lot of decisions around the sneaker net that I observed in Uganda, and I can only assume in other places. And I think part of my interest in this research is there's a lot of work with in the NGO world and development worlds that assume this scarcity and assume that as a result of scarcity, people might prefer to learn more about farming methods or get education on health materials. And what often is driving the sneaker nets, and it was remarkable to me that it's in North Korea and Uganda, is actually entertainment media, and that the response to scarcity is to watch interesting things, play games, have fun experiences, and it's like a lot of my research is looking at that's not very different from how we use the internet, right? Where in the developed parts of the world, we're watching cat videos, we're doing really engaging things as well. Yeah. Yeah, exactly, and that's right. And granted, I bring some of my biases in my research, but when I look at the files that people were looking at, it was very much entertainment media, and that's actually what's driving people's discovery of how Bluetooth works, of how to use SD cards. It's driving a lot of education around how technology works. And then later on, when say an NGO arrives with a computer, they already have frameworks about how connectivity works, about how file structures work, and things like that. And so I think the interesting thing about the scarcity is that people are driving towards entertainment media rather than what often in Western development contexts people will say is more educational or practical media.
And that's unfortunately all we have time for as far as questions. I would like to thank the panelists so much. These were wonderful presentations. Hashmod, thank you. And yeah, so finally we can clap. All right. Thanks for contributing.
Thank you.
And being a part of the talk discussion.
Thanks.
Yeah, that was
Great. Yeah, I love that paper. Yeah.
Yeah, both of your guys' work was really amazing. Really great. Yeah. I have done some stuff in e-waste and in connectivity in Western Africa, so it was really great to see yours.
I'd love to see your.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just kind of starting out on it, still. Searching it out. But yeah, it's terrific. Even though the microphone, I guess I should figure out.
For the next panel.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I think one of the big failings of one laptop, is that it didn't understand the technological context, and so none of those laptops were in the space. And so the kind of the attitude is probably quite similar to the open hardware movement in the sense that people understand that these are modular, they can fixed parts, and so people would hack on these phones and they'll add 5 cents, which is things like that, and so very much different.
Yeah, I've been watching this YouTube video tours of the summer markets in Shenzhen, where there's on the second floor they have camera sensors or whatever in public space. I'm wondering if that's going to emerge, some version of that might emerge in places where the hardware is more.
Well, it's already. Yeah, I think what's interesting is about the kind of attention on Shenzhen and that modularity. As those phones get distributed, is a modularity that is practiced in Africa and other parts of the world. So it's really interesting. It has open hardware principles, but isn't called open hardware.
Yeah, right. There's Kevin Kelly's Cool Tools, things where he sort of documents the ways people hack together, especially in places where they can't afford new spaces.
Right.
So I guess I'm wondering how that filters down, especially to telephones.
I think it's very similar. And China's like the center of like production. Other parts of the world are like centers of like the hacking and like mixing.
It's also interesting because they're not like exactly a target demographic for anybody to sell stuff to, and nearly as much as these objects. So
yeah, that's right.
I wonder how their sense of I don't know, fully oneness of the object is totally not there.
It's interesting. Yeah, I haven't thought about that. I think the kind of target they're very much aware, that they're not the target demographic, and then these Chinese phones are not that cheap. Yeah, they're really cheap, but they're not that great. But in terms of like the relative value, it's a huge cost for folks. So I do think there is a sense of like this is my thing, and I have, and often it's like a personal. It's like the one place where you have personal files and stuff. So yeah, I think that'd be
that's interesting too. When you share devices like that, you feel about the personal.
Yeah, it's like they'll share like some things, but they'll have photos of their family and they things like that.
You might not sext.
Exactly, you might not sext. But I did find evidence of sexting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So all kinds of things that people were sharing. So yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I've got a friend, but I just wanted to say hi, and it was really awesome.
Well, thank you so much.
With you later.
Oh, sure. Oh,
I couldn't tell. I was curious.
Kathy Kittner. Yeah.
Was it on your gallery?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, so she worked with.
Okay, so she works like in the next cube I should have.
Oh, does she really?
In my old cube, so.
Okay, I haven't talked to her in a while. Fantastic.
I'm going back to Moscow.
Oh, okay. Well, very good to meet you. And I'll email you the
find out.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry to put you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi. Oh, here they are. Thank you so much.
I really like the paper. I'm going
Thank
to
you.
film and I'm experimenting with media.
Okay. I do actually.